Aid workers from all over the world have entered Ukraine to alleviate the suffering of its people as they try to flee. Countless refugees have been flooding out of the country to escape Vladimir Putin's brutality, with the Russian military pouring into the state, attacking civilians, sand soldiers and cities bombarded by shells. Here Unicef spokesperson James Elder gives his dispatch diary from Lviv, 50 miles from the Polish border, as refugees flood out the country to escape Russian. Lviv is the last major city Ukrainian people will see before crossing the border in a bid to get away from the war. Sunday. My first full day in Ukraine, having the day before walked across the border from Romania to Ukraine, then embarked on a 5-hour journey to Lviv, in western. At first light I met my two first Ukrainian friends, Victor and Artem, a photographer and videographer. We headed straight to the train station in Lviv. For all the live updates from the Russian invasion, follow our live blog. Karabankova Galina arrived in Medyka, Poland, with her children Danilo, 8, and daughter Anastasia. Image. Copyright UNICEF, UNO 603173, Stanmeyer, 7 photo. The station was wall-to-wall with a crush of people trying to get the train out of Ukraine. Chaotic scenes everywhere. Families who, a night before, were in bunkers or who'd spent 36 hours traveling over 500 kilometers from Kiev, Kharkiv and other roads. The station was awash with sorrow and stress. Husbands embracing wives and saying their farewells. Fathers on their knees explaining to 8-year-old daughters why dad is leaving. Fathers explaining to 11-year-old sons why they must leave to go to a country they'd never heard of, whilst dad had to stay back home in Ukraine. The people, physiotherapists, teachers, accountants, mechanics, every single one, wanted to stay but decided the only safe place for their children was out of. Later that day, I went on the road to the border of Lviv with Poland, a 50-mile journey. Refugees from Ukraine cross the border into Medyka, Poland on Friday. Image. Copyright UNICEF, UNO 603174, Stanmeyer, 7 photo. Most read. Pasha Lee dead. Ukrainian actor who quit to sign up for country's defense is killed. Ukrainian woman who downed drone with jar of tomatoes says she will stay and fight. Well-known TV couple unrecognizable from unearthed 90s wedding photo to mark 25 years. We only drove 20 miles. The next 30 miles were absolute gridlock with back-to-back vehicles that would take 24 hours for people many of whom would have been traveling for days. But at the very least, they were in cars. Some other people were getting out of taxis as they'd reached the end of the road and started to begin their 10-hour walk to the border. There were scenes of traumatized children and parents at wit's end. But this was also the first time I saw the volunteer spirit that would come to dominate. Young teenage girl guides who had cooked and made cookies and cakes, walked along the road tapping on car windows offering these to people. This was the first time I saw flashes of smiles as people accepted the gifts. Grandmothers had prepared huge pots of beautiful smelling food, coffee and tea, so people called nourish themselves. One of them holds my hand and says, "We cry together, we stand together." Monday. It's a bitterly cold morning here on the border of Ukraine. Mothers with children stream past me, desperately seeking refuge to safety in neighboring Romania, but at the same time leaving everything behind. All have harrowing stories of the bombing they have fled. It's now clear children have been killed in this conflict. I'm also painfully aware that more could. Olga, 34, traveled for 2 or 3 days to get to Medyka after escaping from Kyiv with her children. Image. Copyright UNICEF, UNO 603165, Arkady, 7 photo. Vita, 13, and her brother Ilya, 10, image. Copyright UNICEF, UNO 603162, Arkady, 7 photo. Don't miss. Ukrainian woman who downed drone with jar of tomatoes says she will stay and fight. Jennifer Aniston shows her solidarity to the women of Ukraine with donation plea. Striking image shows 1,700 dogs rescued by mother and daughter. Dogs who have spent entire lives locked in crate explore outside for first time. I saw children in tears and mothers comforting them. There's a huge degree of uncertainty for what the coming days hold for so many of these people. And to sear the people who are now safe. Missiles and mortars threaten so many children across Ukraine. I tried to grab about 5 hours sleep tonight, but each time I close my eyes I can see gutting goodbyes, hear those children cry. I eventually drifted off, but was then woken to air raid sirens. Tuesday. I'm staying in an apartment in the center of town in Lviv. On a different day it's absolutely beautiful. A city built at different times over history. Once a university town, a cultural town, but today a town under pressure, a town being used as a refuge for tens of thousands of people. Despite the sirens, Lviv remains a refuge for many thousands who have escaped threat of death from Kiev to Kharkiv. I returned to the train station. It was snowing. Mothers desperately trying to console their kids, children looking utterly traumatized as they see their parents in tears. Thousands of people with forced farewells, not one of them wanting to leave. Everyone bitterly cold. Wednesday. I spent the day talking to people who had arrived the night before from Kharkiv, the second city in Ukraine. Many at a transit center quickly established by the local council. The place is filled with donations and volunteers. A woman told me they were bombarded and blessed to escape. She was terrified. Her parents were still there, and she hadn't heard from them. A mother tells me of her 7-year-old's fear at spending the night in a bunker with rats. Another that they were so cold babies stopped crying. Victor, the photographer who is now also translating, just shakes his head. Pregnant mom of 6 Ilona Poroshchik, 29, fled her home in the Vinnytsia region of Ukraine on March 5, 2022, with her 6 children. Image. Copyright Unicef, UNO 603143, Stanmeyer, 7. Unless the fighting stops, hundreds of thousands more families will be forcibly displaced, dramatically escalating humanitarian needs. As the use of explosive weapons in cities continues, the death toll of children keeps rising. I'm sad. I'm angry. I work. Thursday. I went out to get a coffee at 9 a.m., only to see through the window an empty shop with unfinished breakfasts and coffees on the tables. I soon realized there had been yet another air raid siren, so everyone had fled to the bunker. News comes in that there are now 1 million refugees. 500,000 are children. I spoke to UNICEF colleagues in Romania who have set up our Blue Dot support tents for the new arrivals. From life-saving support in the east to trauma across the borders, we are fast ramping up. That number just won't get out of my head. 500,000 children have been forced to flee their country in 7 days. In scale and speed, it's unprecedented. Number scan num. I replayed the stories of those I have met. Late morning, I went to the children's hospital on the outskirts of Lviv. I met incredible pediatricians and doctors who have been providing emergency care for the children who have been caught up in the conflict and have injuries resulting from the use of heavy weapons and explosives. I saw babies in the ICU, children on drips. The doctors at the hospital prioritize treatment for the children using a dot system. For example, a green dot signifies minor injuries. A child with a red dot would require serious urgent attention, and a black dot tragically means it's too late and not possible to save the child. As this is explained, the pediatric surgeon and I just stood in silence. Shock. Being at the hospital was a really stark reminder that many children and their mothers simply cannot leave Ukraine. Because of their urgent medical needs, their escape is so much more complicated and dangerous. By way of just one example, and there are hundreds, I spoke to a first-time mother, Valeria, and her 2-month child, Emma. They had survived extensive attacks in Dnipro and then driven for 10 hours to the relative safety of Lviv. 2-month-old Emma had coughed blood, so they were at the hospital. Through tears, Valeria told me, "Mentally I am fine. Physically I am not. I want Emma to have a future. I want to know that she will still have both parents alive." This is what mothers have been reduced to ask for in Ukraine. Friday. At the train and bus station in Lviv, somehow, impossibly, there were even more people flooding in from around the country. Every time I turned around, there was another person in tears embracing someone, another person on the phone seeking a loved one in Kyiv or Kharkiv. In the early evening, as it was getting close to curfew time, I walked through the staggeringly beautiful old city. I walked past a 16th century church, where all the statues that dot the perimeter have now been wrapped in foam and taped up. This is the best protection local authorities can offer, fearing the worst that missiles will strike here too. This seems to be a sign that the authorities are trying to protect not only their citizens but their culture. I tracked a convoy of Unicef supplies. It has now crossed Poland and will be in Lviv within hours. It's 45 tons of life-saving medical supplies, heading to 100 hospitals in Kiev and Kharkiv. I tell Victor. He replies, "The world is helping us. You can donate to support UNICEF's work in Ukraine here." Read more. Russia-Ukraine war. Liz Truss slams defense cuts admitting West took eye off the ball. Read more. Boris Johnson to announce energy plan in days as he can't shut off Russian gas overnight.